What up, this is Patrick Haize. In this video, I want to talk about a cool concept, the idea of parallel dimensions and shifting to different parallel timelines, and the role that that plays in the greater story of the metaphysics of humanity and our purpose here on the planet. So this is a working theory that is quite enticing to me, that I'm really enjoying entertaining and have been for quite some time. And it's built up from fragments that I've gotten from many different sources, reality transurfing, from Rosicrucianism, from Bashar, from different metaphysical understandings, ancient Egyptian lore, all sorts of different things. And it is what I'm trying to do is bring a way of speaking about it into terms that I feel like more of the average person can understand. So what I want to talk about today is the role that parallel dimension shifting plays in our evolution as a soul, and how that kind of works a little bit, and the way I see that in its correlation to karma and to the world and the dramas of the world and what our path is and what our purpose is. So without getting too deep and too super esoteric, what I will say is that one of the things that I feel very deeply is that the purpose for humanity, for each individual, is to realize their authentic self, their organic self, their true self. And in the full realization of this divine blueprint, you could say the soul's divine blueprint, in the realization into a manifest form of this divine soul blueprint, we in a sense have like beat the level, or we have won the game. And so the way I see our process in the incarnational process in general, but in this life on planet Earth, is very much that we have this divine blueprint that we are trying to realize. And in the realization of it, in a sense, we become a different kind of eternal. And in becoming this kind of eternal, essentially what happens is we're able to make like an infinite personality. And I've explained this to a certain degree in some of my other videos. I'll put a link up, I don't remember the name of it, to the video where I talked about this recently. But essentially it's this idea that we have this potential to become this kind of godly-like being. And when we harness that potential within our incarnational space, then what we do is we give ourselves the capacity to have the same opportunities that we have in the incarnational space as an eternal option, right? So we can continue to keep reincarnating, and we stabilize a certain level of like geometric structure within our soul, which is the astral body, that then we take with us everywhere we go, and then we retain the memories that are in resonance with that divine blueprint, which is in resonance with the Godhead. And so it's a way of becoming immortal, of immortalizing our consciousness. And it's a more advanced type of immortalization than, say, just the immortal fraction of the infinite Godhead that we have as the seed within us. Now, one thing I want to say right here before I go too deep is that what we're dealing with here, and I'm going to say this again at the end, what we're dealing with here is a extremely complex, metaphysical, holographic experience that we call life and reincarnation and the cosmos and the universe and all the multi-dimensions, right? So there's infinite different angles we can look at this thing. And there's infinite different correct interpretations that might seem quite different than each other and even sometimes contradictory. But the idea here is to be flexible with our consciousness so that we can entertain many of these different ideas, and we can see which one of these are appropriate at what time, and we can find the synergy between all of them. And this is really becoming a multidimensional thinker. So as I move forward into my explanation of this form of metaphysics, I'm not saying this is the fixed way. What I'm saying is that every different way of looking at it may offer different fruits, and for what feels in resonance with you, this is something that you can trust has a measure of truth for you. But realize, depending on the angle you're looking at it, depending on your point of perception in the cosmos, there are going to be different truths that are more in resonance with you than other truths. So again, I'm not saying this is a blanket expression of what everything is, but rather this is what I have considered to be extremely accurate representation or interpretation from the particular angle that I'm at that describes things that may be beneficial for you to hear. So with that said, parallel dimensions is a really interesting theory that that I feel is, for me, is quite real, right? So I call it a theory because, you know, there may be skeptics that watch this video or whatnot. But for me, I very much believe in this because I have, in my experience, this has been very true to my experience. I've expressed it in a lot of different ways throughout my videos. But the idea of parallel dimensions is the idea that there's infinite different parallel dimensions that simultaneously exist. And every time you make a decision, you shift onto a different timeline. And essentially, the doorway to different timelines is the vibration that you're in. So when you shift your vibration, and in the shifting of vibration, then make different decisions or go in different directions in life, you actually shift onto a parallel dimension timeline that has its own story in its own direction, right? And so the idea is that if you're on a particular parallel dimension timeline, it has its ending. So whichever direction you're pointed, it's like if you just keep going straight down that, it will end in a very particular way. And people think of the world as being like this static place, like the world is the world, right? They don't think of parallel dimensions. They think of the world as the world. So if you want to change your reality, you have to change the external world. Well, actually the idea is more so that you don't necessarily change the external world as much as you shift to a new timeline that is in resonance with the vibration that you are shifting to. So it's not as much about changing the world out there as much as it is changing your vibration in here, which shifts you to a new world. Now, where this idea falls into line with the idea of becoming like an eternal personality or becoming an eternal being in the new sense of eternal is that you can think of our divine self, that true organic self, that divine blueprint realized. You can think of that as like a light at the very center of like a giant plate, you could say. And our path to this light, to this true realization, can be very varied. One way that we can travel is the long way, which is in a sense like taking a spiral really slowly towards that center, right? And eventually, after many, many different incarnations and many different timeline experiences, we eventually make it to that center. So you can think of like this true self is at the center. And how do we understand or realize this true self is we go through all these different life experiences, through many different lives, where we experience, say, the entire tarot deck. We experience all of the different archetypal experiences that we could experience in life. And we get to know all of the different archetypes very deeply. We get to experience all the different possibilities of what life could be. So all the dramas of life, all the different karmic experiences of doing something and then getting the karma back from that. We go through so many of those things that inch by inch we learn more and more of what our true nature is. Every time we face a different issue or a different drama in our life, it teaches us by going through that a little bit more about who we are, and then we start embodying more and more of who we are. And we can take this really, really long path. And this is basically like filling out or following the path that we're on, the parallel dimension timeline that we're on, from where we are all the way to the end. And very little change over that period of time, but eventually, over eons and eons, we eventually make it to the center and we realize that true version of ourselves. The way that I see parallel dimension shifting is the idea that when we start learning the mechanics of the game, then instead of taking the long path in which we have to go through all of the karmic trials and all of the drama and all the archetypal dramas that play out in life, we can actually decide to maybe shift directly towards the inner as opposed to going all the way around. Oh, we can just go directly towards the inner. And this is like a parallel dimension shift. We can do a parallel dimension timeline shift. And the idea here is that in order to make a shift like that, it requires us to become much more flexible. And this is the idea of, say, losing your identity, as they talk about in a lot of the Eastern traditions, right? Becoming identityless, right? Becoming empty. And the reason why becoming empty is so powerful is you're like, well, wait a second, I thought you were creating an infinite personality. Well, the idea is that an infinite personality has infinite faces. Meaning, if you're fixed on a particular identity of yourself, then you can't be an infinite personality because you're limiting yourself to one identity. And limiting yourself to one identity or one belief system is what keeps you on the long path all the way around, because you have to experience that belief system to the very end and all the different experiences that come with that belief system to then maybe decide, well, I learned a lesson from that belief system and I'm going to choose this belief system now and maybe go a different path. And you see people like this that are very fixed on their opinions, right? Have a really strong confirmation bias. They've been the same person, it seems like, to you. You've known them for 30 years or however long you've known them. They've always been the same, right? Because they're very fixed in their way. Well, that person's on a particular timeline and they'll learn a lesson from that timeline. But that is a timeline that, say, it's a much longer route to their true realization of self than somebody that's always shifting and always changing their mind and always becoming a new, better version of themselves. because they're more open. So the idea is how to shift more towards that inner path is by being flexible. And this is why emptiness is so powerful, because when you become empty, then you're not fixed on any identity. And then you can be flexible enough to, say, bleed in between the cracks of the particular timeline that you're in and take a different path. So if you have an identity that you can only do a particular thing, or this is who you are, then there's only so many options for you in your life. Therefore, where you're gonna end up is pretty fixed. Yet, if you're completely open and you realize that you're infinite and you could be anything, and you have the flexibility to be anything, meaning you don't have a ton of resistance that's preventing you from trying new things or exploring different things or believing that you could do something that's crazy maybe. When you don't have those blocks and you're open to that, then when different opportunities arise in your life, you're like, oh, well, I could respond to it this way. I could respond to it that way. You're thinking outside the box. And because you're outside the box, then you can start shifting to other parallel dimensions, and you can actually find out of the infinite possibilities some of the possibilities that are much more in alignment with who you truly are, because you're open to being anything. So when you're open to being anything, who you truly are, which is indicated to you by inspiration, by the things that help you vibe really high, the things that really excite you, things that light you up when you don't have resistance to what lights you up. When you can follow those inspirations, it will take you into really strange positions, like in other words, really flexible positions. You'll find yourself moving and doing things that are really strange that maybe you never thought that you would do before. But in doing that, essentially, you're shifting to different parallel timelines that are pulling you more towards your true essence. And this is why I said it's the things that inspire you, the things that light you up, that is kind of like the compass on this path, because your true essence at the center is your true self. So naturally, the things that light you up and bring you into higher resonance are going to be an indicator that you are following the path to your truest self. So in following that compass, what you'll find is that if you have resistances, or you don't believe that you can do certain things, well, you're not going to be able to follow that thread, right? That thread is going to surprise you, because you are way more vast and way more powerful than you even believe. All of us are, right? So we need to be open to what our heart is yearning for. And we need to be open to follow that path in order to truly find out what we are, because it's a major surprise. Now, as far as the mechanics of shifting different parallel dimensions, that is like a whole deep video in itself. In fact, that's probably quite a few different videos. But there's some great resources out there. A lot of the law of attraction stuff kind of tries to talk about this, though I feel like law of attraction, a lot of the stuff out there is really watered down. I like Vadim Zeland's work where he talks about reality transurfing. That's cool. There's some good stuff in there. I'm an old school student of Bashar. Bashar has some really great stuff about that. His stuff's kind of hard to find online now. They try to make everybody pay for everything and come to his events. And I'm not sure how much I resonate with the stuff that he's been putting out recently. But his old stuff is really, really cool. And they really get into the mechanics of how to shift different dimensions and really just metaphysical mechanics in general. But I've really incorporated it with a lot of different things, like I mentioned earlier, and I will be doing videos on the mechanics of that as we move forward. But I just wanted to give an overarching understanding of maybe a metaphysics that makes sense for the direction of a human in this time-space matrix as we're evolving and experiencing different parallel timelines and different incarnations. Now, when I say that this is an overarching theory or an overarching understanding of metaphysics, one thing I want to say is that the complexity of what we're dealing with is so vast that it isn't something that can fully crystallize into one explanation. So even though I'm giving an explanation here for what's happening, there is truth in it, and it resonates to the people that it resonates because you can feel the truth in it. But at the same time, I could probably describe 6 or 7 different ways of understanding what I'm talking about that might sound quite different, but they're accurate also. Because this is a very deeply layered thing that we're talking about here. Existence is quite multidimensional. And I'm expressing it from one very particular angle of looking at it. And so this is something you have to keep in mind when you're working with metaphysics. This is something that explains why so many different mystery school traditions have so many different stories. You can see these consistencies throughout all of the different stories. Like one consistency is that everything was oneness first before it came into the manifest world. There was this like divine oneness that existed pre-creation, right? So there's different themes like that carry across all of these different traditions and all the different understandings, because these themes are have an inherent truth to them. But then different perspectives you can think of it like a prism. You can break light up into a bunch of different colors. And it doesn't mean any color is wrong, but there's a bunch of different ways you can look at it. There's a bunch of different geometries to this holographic model of existence that we're experiencing. And so depending on what angle you're looking at it, you can have an alternative, correct interpretation of the same thing that might seem contradictory or different than another one. But the idea is we have to learn to embrace the contradiction, embrace the paradox, realize there are contradictory paradoxes going on. They're both simultaneously true, and we have to honor that. And then also do our best to be as flexible with our consciousness to be able to understand as many different perspectives as we can, and then extract the fruits from all those different perspectives and then learn which perspective to use in the right appropriate time. So with that said, thank you so much for tuning in. This is Patrick Haize. Like, subscribe, share with your friends. If you have any questions or comments, put them in the comments below. If you want me to double click on any particular ideas or aspects of this transmission that you would like me to expand on, I go ahead and mention that in the comments below, and I'm super stoked to continue sharing awesome content with you. So thanks for tuning in. I'll talk to you next time. One love.